Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us today. My name is AJ, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Ofer Mendelevich from Vectara.
Hi, everyone. This is Ofer. I'm heading developer relations at Vectara, and great to be here. Thanks, AJ.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we're excited to share with you what we think is a great way to build AI data pipelines for large language models. If you're live with us today, please feel free to drop comments and feedback in the webinar chat. You can also drop your questions in the dedicated questions tab. And we'd love to see your questions, and we'll make sure to reply to all of them. To help us out, also, we've got Joe and Chris from Airbyte. They're in the chat and will help us today in making sure we respond to all of your questions. We are also recording this session, and we'll be sending out the link and the slides to everyone who is registered today. So, quick overview of the session today. We'll assume that you're somewhat familiar with large language models, or LLMs for short, like GPT and ChatGPT. In the context of LLMs, we're going to talk a little about unstructured data. Unstructured data matters more in 2024 than ever before. And I'll share with you some of Airbyte's strategy regarding unstructured data and some new features which we have, which will help you make the most of your unstructured data. Then Ofer will give you a detailed explanation of Vectara and the benefits of their as-a-service approach to RAG and LLMs. In case you're not deeply familiar with RAG or retrieval augmented generation, Ofer will dive into the details of that. So by the end of the session, you'll have a much stronger grasp on what RAG is, why it matters, and how to implement it. So let's dive in. So data movement for AI and everything else, that's what we're at Airbyte. So whether you want to move data for a new AI pipeline or for traditional data warehousing, analytics, operational use cases, all of that is what we do at Airbyte. For this talk, we're going to focus on unstructured data. And before we do that, I just want to say what I mean by unstructured data. Unstructured data are things like Word documents, PDFs, text files, and the word unstructured really came about in contrast to traditional structured sources like database tables, Excel files, APIs, things that were very strictly structured. We have a first name field, a last name field, this tabular data. For a very long time, it was sufficient to just move tabular data around. And so Airbyte and many other ELT providers have focused on structured data. But now that we have AI and we have LLMs and GPT, the unstructured data is immensely valuable because it can bring insight, it can become actionable, and we are really focusing on unstructured data at Airbyte. So here are some new supported document stores that we have with Airbyte. This was just launched in, I believe, December. We have support for Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, Amazon S3, Azure Blob Storage. Pretty much anywhere where you might put a PDF or a Word document, we can get it with Airbyte and build a data pipeline around it. You'll also find that sometimes unstructured text data, such as call comments or notes that you might have taken, might end up in other systems like Salesforce, HubSpot, GitHub, and of course you can access those as well with Airbyte. So if you're new to Airbyte, we just, like I've kind of been explaining, get data from any source to any destination. We're built on open source, so you can run on your own hosted platform, or you can use our service, depending on just what level of support you're looking for. We're going to be focusing on AI today, but just know that the same data pipelines we're going to talk about today will also work for traditional data sources. Now, before I hand off, I just want to go through a couple of common challenges people run into with unstructured data. First of all, let's say you have data in Google or you have data in S3. Your first challenge, of course, is authentication. Then you have a PDF or a Word document, and you want to get meaningful text out of that. That's the parsing challenge. When you are finally posting to a vector store, you'll have to tackle this thing called chunking, which is taking a very large file and breaking it up into smaller, let's say, paragraphs or sections. And then finally, embedding. I'm not going to go into all those details on chunking and embedding because Ofer is going to go through those things. But just to say that by using Airbyte, you're going to get a code-free implementation of all of these things where you can just specify your configuration and you'll get the data flowing where you need it to go to power your AI. And with that, I'm happy to hand over to Ofer.
Thanks, Ajay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Vectara, and as Ajay said, a little bit about retrieval augmented generation. So let me start about Vectara. We are a platform for creating generative AI applications, and you see here in the slide how this is working. Essentially, the platform has two types of APIs. One is for uploading your data or indexing your data, and the other one is to issuing queries. And I'll talk more about this in the next couple of slides. But generally, what we do is we capture a lot of the complexity inside of building a generative AI application, which includes extraction of data, encoding or embedding that AJ talked about, indexing the data in our own implementation of a vector store, implementing of the whole retrieval process when you query something, re-ranking, and generation of a final response. So all of these, you can do on your own with other tools, but it ends up it's being quite complex. And one of the reasons for Vectara's value is that it actually does all of this for you, so you don't have to do it yourself, and you can have more simplification of building your app. You just have to focus on your data and the movement of that data from the source to Vectara, which we'll focus on in today's presentation, and also about building the application side and issuing the query on behalf of your users. If you please go to the next slide. Some of the common use cases for generative AI, and I'm sure some of you have heard about this, but very common is to have chatbots similar to ChatGPT, question answering, which is showing answers with citations when you ask a question, semantic search, and research and analysis. So those are the main common use cases for generative AI in general. And then if you please go to the next slide. Let me talk about what is RAG. As AJ mentioned, it's called retrieval augmented generation. And essentially, when you use ChatGPT or any of the other LLMs that are available today for chat, you issue a user query and you ask the LLM to respond to that query. And that's maybe what's shown here in the vertical flow. With retrieval augmented generation, what you do instead is you take your data, and as I just said, there's extraction and chunking that gets done. But eventually, during query time, you do a retrieval of the most relevant facts, and you provide those facts to the LLM. And then the LLM essentially is asked to answer your question conditioned on or given those facts, right? And so you get a response that's grounded in those facts, and that's what makes a RAG so special. Now, it turns out that this is a fantastic way to use LLM with your own data, which the LLM doesn't know because it's been trained on public data. It helps dramatically reduce hallucinations, which are when the response is incorrect or false, and I'll show the example of that. And again, I talked about the use cases. Those are very common there. So going to the next slide, what is a hallucination? I mentioned this. So this is one of my favorite examples. You asked ChatGPT, did Will Smith ever hit anyone? And this is the response you get. Well, Will Smith is, a pretty cool guy, no credible evidence to suggest that he ever physically assaulted anybody. And then until you've been in the Oscars of 2022 and you know what really happened. And this is because that version of ChatGPT did not have this fact in its training set, so it didn't know about this. But if you use RAG and you give it the latest news articles, it will of course know about this and give you the right answer. So that's what hallucinations are. Okay, so now moving on. One other thing I wanted to mention, and this is something that with Vectara actually released late last year, and it's a very popular model. It's called a HHEM, which is a hallucination evaluation model. And I wanted to mention this because it's actually really relevant for RAG. When you use RAG, you want to use the best model to summarize the response from the facts. And it turns out not all models are the same. So we actually build a model to measure the hallucination rate, and you can see here there's some, GPT-4 and GPT-4 Turbo turns out that they're still the best and they have a pretty low hallucination rate. But as you go down the list, you see that there's others that are not as good. So turns out, again, not all are the same, and this is been a really helpful tool for the community to be able to understand this complexity. Okay, so with that, I want to show you, talk about, why we want to use RAG for generative AI, and then walk you through the flow of RAG in a little more detail and get into, kind of where data movement comes into this. So first, again, I mentioned that RAG is good for augmenting your LLM with your own data. One other thing that's really important to note is that it is there's privacy involved in this flow. As we'll see, there's no training done. So a lot of people in the LLM space know about training or fine-tuning, and that honestly scares a lot of people for a good reason. And so in RAG, there's no training of the data involved. The data is only used, as I've shown earlier, to kind of feed the facts into the LLM. So the data privacy is maintained in that way. It's very easy to deploy. Fine-tuning or training of models is available. It's much more pricey. If you want to do it yourself, it's hard to deploy this kind of stuff. You need GPUs and things like this, so it makes it much more complicated. And lastly, fine-tuning and training of models is actually, to do it right, requires quite a lot of expertise. And it's sometimes a dedicated team of experts in this field, which is not very easy to find. So that's another challenge that enterprises face when they try to do this. If you go to the next slide, please. Oops, yeah, that one. So I wanted to show you how RAG works in a little more detail. And I know this is a little bit of a busy slide, but I think it's important to demonstrate the various steps. So if you start at the top left, you see there's a enterprise data store. There's a lot of places where the data is stored right now. It could be, like as you said, the kind of more traditional structured data sets or semi-structured, but also unstructured that we're talking about today, like S3 or Google Drive. And then usually the first step is to take some document processing, extraction of text, and chunking, and all these steps that are done here. And then you can then create an embedding for each chunk and store this embedding in what's called a vector store. And again, I'm showing in each box here just a few examples, because every one of those boxes probably has multiple candidates for tools to do that. Like vector store alone, I think, has like 65 types of vector stores these days. But you also store the chunk itself in a text store. And then when you actually want to, when a query comes in, you embed the query as well. You compare it against the vector store, and you extract those chunks I talked about earlier. Those chunks are then fed into a prompt for the LLM, for GPT-4, let's say, and fed into the LLM, which is hosted somewhere. And then optionally, you can also do some response validation and get the response back to the user. So this is kind of how the flow works end to end. I can also mention that in some cases, a more advanced step is this red flow, which is action, where you can actually take the response and do something with it, like email it or add a Jira ticket or something like this. So that's something that we're starting to see as well. So this is the flow when you have to do everything yourself. One of the advantages of using Vectara, if you go to the next slide, is that we take a lot of this heavy lifting from you. So as AJ said, right, Airbyte can do the data movement here. And of course, you can use the chunking and the extraction that is done there already. Although we also provide chunking. So I think for, as a user, as a developer, you can choose which one to use. They are both available. And then But a lot of the other more complicated pieces of how to do retrieval properly, which embedding models to use to make sure it's the best. There's a lot of complexity in this, and what we do with Vectara is we actually expose this as an API, and you can just call the API for indexing information or documents or text, and for querying and get the response, and we take off all the complexity, whether it's for one PDF or 10 million PDFs. That's the nice thing about the platform. All right. So moving on from here, what is the Vectara Airbyte destination? So it's a destination connector that allows you to take any of the sources, whether they are the more traditional databases to what we talk about today, which is the unstructured, and move them through the Airbyte platform into your Vectara account. So once you have a Vectara account, in the account we call sometimes we call this a corpus, is where your data resides. It's similar to index in a regular database. And so you decide where the data goes and how it's ingested in here. And I'll show you a demo of that in a little bit. And then once you have that here, you can, again, use the query API to build applications that will do a ChatGPT-like user experience very quickly, very easily with for your users. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so now I'll move to do a little demo, and let me share my screen here for this. Okay.
It's all yours.
Thank you.
And while he's pulling that up, if anybody has questions, you can drop them in the chat. As I mentioned, we're monitoring that.
All right. Can you see my screen here?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm using the Airbyte cloud here. And actually, for this demo, I've already created a connection from a Google Drive that I set up to a Vectara account. And because this takes about 3 or 4 minutes, I've created it, but it hasn't worked yet. So I'm going to run it while we kind of want to walk you through how I set it up from scratch. But I just didn't want everybody to wait. So I'm going to sync this now. And now I'm going to go back and show you how I've done this before that. So while this is syncing, so the way I approach this is I started a new connection. And the first thing you do is you select a new source. And in this case, I wanted to select a Google Drive source. So I have it here. And then here, what I do is I have a folder URL for the folder that I want to put in. In this case, I put actually 2 PDFs in that folder. These are books from the Gutenberg project that I pulled up that are free and open source. One is for Moby Dick and the other for Alice in Wonderland. So let me pull up the folder. So I take the actual folder URL from Google Drive, and I can just put it here like so. Oops, without this. And then the second thing is to do authentication. So now I have to authenticate this to my Google Drive. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm gonna have to pick one. I'm not gonna do it here because I've already done this, but I will click on this and it will authenticate it as you do this yourself. And the other thing I have to add is to add this stream of what I want to synchronize and configure it. And this has a bunch of different options, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But that's the standard option for this case work. And that's really the Google Drive configuration. It's very simple. And then the other thing, so let's say I'm not going to set up the source here. I'm just going to show you how I configure the destination. The destination will be, I'm going to look here for Vectara. Click on the Vectara component. And here, I'm going to call it whatever I want to call it. Let's call it Vectara 2. Now, Vectara has, we have our own console. So once you set up your Vectara account in our sign up link, you can, and I'm going to show you my console. We have our own console, and I have here a corpus that's called GD01. This was actually created by Airbyte when I first synchronized this. And when it's synchronizing, it's creating it. And you see it's actually, it says 0, but I think we ran the synchronization. So maybe now it's got some stuff that already loaded in. So if I go here, I can see what's loaded. Okay, one of the files is loaded in and the other one is still in progress, it looks like. So Alice's Wonderland is in and the other one is still in progress. But here I'll have my customer ID, this one, which I'm now going to copy over here. I'm going to call it GD01. I can also use the parallelize button. This makes the ingest faster by using multi-threading on the Airbyte side. So if you want, you can turn that on. In our case, it's not that. It only takes a few minutes, so it's not a big deal. The next important thing is authentication. And in this case, if I go to my Vectara console, I have this access control here, and I have a key that I created for this purpose. But here, what I really want to use is our, so every corpus has API keys you can use, but really that's not what I want to use here. What I want to use here is our OAuth 2 authentication. So I'm going to go to API access, and my account has a client ID here and a secret here that I can copy. So if I copy this and I can kind of put that here, that's the client ID, and then I'm not going to do the secret, but I can copy the secret here, and that will be the setup. And once I do that correctly from that screen, that can access my Vectara corpus. And then here, there's 3 interesting other settings you can use, and I'll show you how it's set up in the other screen. But this one is to set what fields from the source become metadata fields in Vectara, what fields are used to index the text, and if there's any field in the source that is used as a title in Vectara, it'll set it up this way. And that's all you need to do to set it up. Now let me go to the connection again, and I want to show you how this was set up. So I'm going to go to the Google Drive connection that has been used. It's already authenticated. As you can see, it's set up like I've shown you before. And the Vectara connection that I used to synchronize already has, again, the same things. It's got the client ID and the secret. And these text fields, as you can see in the case of Google Drive, the text of the document, whether it's a PDF or a PowerPoint, comes in this field called content. And that's what I'm going to use as the actual text to index in Vectara. And then these 2 fields are the file name or file URL, and the last modified field I'm going to use as metadata. And the document key from Google Drive actually is the field that has the file name, and I'm going to use it as a title. So if I go back to this connection that we had, let's see what the status is. I think it's done. So if I go back to my console and I see the size, it's higher, and you see there's 2 files here. So everything is done. It's synced up. And now, you notice the console has a couple other things you can use it. I don't want to go too much into detail here, but you can configure other metadata fields if you want. You can also run some small queries. For example, I can do who is Ahab, and try that, for example. And as you can see, it'll give me a response like this with some citations, right, that show where this was taken from and all that. But this is in our console. This is really to try out and see things. What I wanted to show you now is I've used a tool that is an open source repository that is on the Vectara GitHub called Vectara Answer. And to create user interfaces for generative AI, it's really important to create really good UI. So this has been created, again, completely Apache licensed open source. So you can configure this and point it into a Vectara corpus and run it immediately to generate a really nice question answering interface. So this is the example I created. I entered a couple of sample questions here. I pointed it to this this corpus called GD01. And let me show an example. I can ask again the same question I had before, and now you get a nice, quick user interface that works right out of the box. And this is something you can host yourself on, as a Docker instance or as a Node.js application in your own systems. It's not part of our console, so something you can use right away to integrate with your enterprise applications.
This is awesome. Well, you've got that up. I'd like to add a few things if it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So we often get asked how large of files can this handle? And what I love about this demo that Ofer presented is that Moby Dick is something like 400 pages. That's longer than any tech spec we're going to write. And that's just one document. It had no problem with that scale of data. And all of the splitting or chunking into smaller slices is handled for you. You didn't have to handle that. And you're seeing that there are meaningful results coming back. I also, while I've got the stage, in the questions, we had a question of how does incremental sync work? And Joe's, I think, provided a response there. But another nice thing about this is that Airbyte's automatically handling getting new records for you based on changed timestamps, and also deduping when we reinsert into the corpus. So you're kind of transparently getting incremental support. And yeah, thank you for that question in chat. That's a great one. So it's kind of hidden behind this really easy to use interface, but behind the scenes we're making sure that this scales. So when you add that third file and didn't touch the first two, or if you modify one of these files, it just works. So you just kick it off again, or schedule it hourly, daily, whatever works for you. Yeah. Back to you, Ofer.
Yeah, I just wanted to show. I was showing as you were speaking that there's also a nice feature where you can actually change the language of the response, which I think is really cool. So you can get the response in whatever language. You can also ask questions in a different language, which sometimes is very nice. So this is also kind of cross-lingual right out of the box. But yeah, that's really what I wanted to show in the demo. And let me, unless there's any questions related to them, I can stop sharing here. Let me see. All right. And back to you, Ajay.
All right. Thank you. 1 second while I think you should now, be able to see my screen again. Well, fantastic. So quickly, we want to go through how to get started. We've got some links here and instructions. You can create an account with Vectara. You can also sign up on the Airbyte site for a free trial if you're not already an Airbyte customer. You can set up, just as Ofer demonstrated, a source, which would be anywhere you want to pull data, and a destination, such as Vectara, where you can land this data. And what is cool about the Vectara platform is that you didn't have to get an OpenAI account. That you don't have to go get an OpenAI API key. You don't need to think about the embeddings call. All that's just handled for you. And then also, as he showed, you can directly query it and make questions through the Vectara interface or through their deployable web app. So if you have more questions, you can find us in our Slack. And we do these webinars every month. And I guess if there's any last Q&A, we can jump into that. But I think we covered that one question. Y'all are pros, I guess, already. So if there's nothing else, we'll say thank you. And
another question. about how to get information from unstructured data and structured data. Like, for example, if there's a database connected and it contains relevant information along with the documents.
Oh yeah, I see that. Sorry, it was in the other tab. Question.
Yeah, I can tackle that a little bit. I think so. Thank you for that question. I think the way I understand this question is if I have data that's both a PDF and some tables in, let's say, Snowflake or Redshift or something, how do I use that together with Vectara? So I think, again, the data movement piece, because of Airbyte, becomes super easy. You can ingest both of those. But I will say that structured data sometimes is numerical, right? So Vectara and generative AI in general works mostly with text data. So a good example of where it does work well is, let's say you want to have your data includes reviews of products or Airbnb comments or something like this. Then you'll take those columns from that structured data and you'll construct from them, as you move the data over to Vectara, something that kind of an LLM can process, nicely and use. If you just send it a bunch of numbers, it's not that good for that, at least not yet. The LLMs really work on text. So it is very useful to do that when you have data that comes from a database where it's got enough columns that are textual. Another strategy I've seen work really well is even if it's numbers, you can construct almost like a sentence per row. So you can let me make an example with a product. You can say, let's say you have product name, price, color, and a review. You can construct this artificial sentence that says the product, name of the product, who is priced at X, and has these many stars, and the comments are like this and like that. And that's where you take some of the numerical variables, but you give them context for the LLM eventually to understand what the number is. Because if it's a column and it's just a bunch of numbers after the column name, the LLM doesn't know what that number means.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing. This is a little bit of a niche for this use case, but we do also support not necessarily sentence structure, but if you select multiple text fields during insert, those will be kind of concatenated together as something that looks kind of like YAML, where the name of the field, colon, and the value of the field. Yeah, so it's maybe not great for the RAG model. The best would be a sentence structure, but just to mention that there's also that option. And if you have feedback for us, we'd love to hear that. Thanks for that awesome question. And while we've been chatting, some more questions have popped into the chat. So I'll read through them, unless, Joe, you've already read them and want to jump in on any of them. I do see a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question about supported vector databases for Airbyte. So you can send data directly to Vectara, which has more sophisticated processing pipelines. There's also a few raw vector databases supported. I dropped the ones in the chat, but yeah, you can always check the documentation, which lists out all the details for support.
Great. Yeah, thanks for putting that link. Yeah, you can go to that link and find all of the vector destinations we support. Great.
And as AJ mentioned previously, right, I see here Vectara as part of a list of vector databases. I just want to mention we're not a vector database.
Yes.
We're a platform. And again, the benefit is you don't have to take care of all these details. A vector database just does a piece of the puzzle. And again, you have to do the embedding yourself. Like I just said, you have to call the OpenAI yourself and have a key and all this kind of stuff. So
yeah. Great. Thanks everybody for joining. Last chance for questions. Type them fast. Otherwise, we're going to say thank you so much, and we hope to see you next month and see you in Slack. And I hope this was helpful for everyone. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.